I was asked to talk about my experience with the Atlantic article, but mostly centered around patient advocacy. So what I want to do today is share some of the story. I've got to go into the details of it, and then kind of tie that into how I was a patient advocate and how I chose to do the right thing. So I don't want this to appear as I was telling to Dr. Quinones before, a bashing session of the retiring dentist, but I kind of need to go into the details of it for you all to understand what I was dealing with and how I moved forward. So the Atlantic article, I'm curious if you guys wouldn't mind raising your hands. How many of you actually read it? Okay, so most people in here. It's been rewritten so many times now. I think online it was titled, "Is Dentistry a Science and the Truth About Dentistry?" But then the actual printed magazine of it was The Trouble with Dentistry. And now they're calling it One Dentist Drills Another, which I find interesting. So I'm just going to do a quick, for those of you, there was a couple hands that didn't go up, I'll just do a real quick summary of it, and then we'll go into the details of it. So basically, Atlantic, the nationwide magazine, published this article, The Trouble with Dentistry, and it discussed a dentist that retired in 2012. And then he sold the practice to me, and 5 to 6 months after owning the practice, I discovered insurance fraud, overtreatment, unnecessary treatment, and treatment that was billed for that was never performed. Basically, the selling dentist was exposed by me, which led to multiple patient civil suits, and then the dental board, the California Dental Board, stepped in, and as well as the district attorney's office. The dentist was arrested in 2016. The reason that this, I guess, article was made such a ruckus in our profession is that the journalist that wrote it used the actions of the retiring dentist, and then he extrapolated that to the dental profession as a whole, saying things like dentistry is not evidence-based, that we're motivated by profit to pay down our huge dental school loans. So it was extremely controversial to the ADA, the California Dental Association, the American Society of Endodontics, I mean, you name them, pretty much everybody in our profession was pretty upset. In addition to that, they decorated the article with really calming pictures like the one here. A dentist wearing a burglar mask. So, tiny bit about me. I know Dr. DeRossi introduced me a little bit. I went to UOP, graduated in 2006. I've been practicing 13 years now. While I was there, they named the school after Arthur A. Degoni, and he retired in 2006. So the fact that my last name starts with a Z, I was the very last person that he graduated. Where I practice is about an hour south of San Francisco now, and a neat piece of information is today is the 30-year anniversary of the huge earthquake we had in 1989. So when I first graduated, I was telling the ECU students at lunch just now that I chose to become an associate at several different locations. Between 8 and 10 locations, I was an associate for 3 years, just gaining as much knowledge as I could. So I would recommend to the new students graduating here, that'd be a good place to start. In 2009, I located a practice in Saratoga, California, which is a small town outside of San Jose. Like I said, about an hour south of San Francisco. And it was a very high-end practice, very little insurance, mostly fee-for-service, very successful patients, high-quality patients that cared about their mouths. And however, I was in my early 30s at the time, and working 2 to 3 days a week just wasn't enough. Obviously, we get our profession, we want to practice it at least 4 or 5 days a week. So after 2 years, I began looking for another practice to merge this first practice with. And I began aggressively looking, and the dental broker that sold me the first practice located a practice for me about 1.5 miles away. And the fact that it was being marketed by him, I had very good confidence that this could be a good fit. So this picture here is my first little practice. It's pretty humble when I think about it, where I started. So I was introduced to the dentist of the second practice in December of 2011, and I did some due diligence, which constituted about 2 hours of pulling patient charts and looking at some financial records. And the practice was performing pretty well. It was doing 60 to 80,000 collections per month, that's pretty decent for a one-man show, a smaller practice in San Jose. It was comparable to the way my existing practice was going, so I figured they complemented one another. Dental practices, when they come for sale, I'm not sure how it is here, but in the Bay Area, everything's very competitive. And you don't have much time, so you've really got to work hard to get the selling dentist to retire, the retiring dentist to choose you to buy their practice. So I think there was 5 or 6 people interested in this practice, and he selected me first, and I only had about a day or so to make the decision, which is not very much time considering it was a $500,000 purchase at the time. So I was expecting everything would be run the way my practice was, and on February 2nd, 2012, I purchased the practice. The practice is in San Jose, about 1.5 miles from Saratoga. I want to say a quick thing about practice valuation. Pretty much the way brokers sell practices is they use a formula, and they take the final 5 years of practice, they take an average of that, then they times it by 75%, and that's the sale price. So for instance, if a practice did $1 million, your purchase price as the buying dentist would be $750,000. This practice was doing between $720,000 to almost $1 million every year in the final 5 years, so it kind of gives you an indication of why my purchase price is what it was. The first month completed, February of 2012, the production was really low, it was $15,000. And it was a drastic change. I mean, to go from making $60,000 to $80,000 a month to $15,000, seemed out of the ordinary. Now, there typically is a little bit of a dip when a new dentist steps in and purchased a practice from a retiring dentist, but by this drastic of a change seemed very strange to even the broker that was doing it for 35 years. So my first thought was, well, did all the patients leave? Like, did I blow something here such the patients didn't want to come to me? I couldn't really figure out after the first month what was going on. I had no reason to point the finger at anyone, right? I'm ethical. My dad, my brother, who are both dentists, are ethical. So why would I blame anyone except myself? I'm running the practice and it's not performing well, so of course, I must have done something wrong. By now, a month and a half in, I merged my existing practice with this new practice. So for instance, my first practice was being seen in one room and the second practice was being seen in the other room. Well, the first practice was still performing really, really well, like outstandingly well. And the second practice wasn't. So that was kind of pointing the finger at myself. Why is one practice doing really well and the other one's not? And it's the same dentist, same hygienists going back and forth. At the end of the first month, I apologize, this was last minute cropped at the suggestion of my attorneys. I decided to put on a retirement party for the retiring dentist where I wanted to see who the patients were, so to speak. I did it for my first practice, and see where they were, if they would come. And we sent out about 250 to 300 invitations, and we were pretty aggressive about the RSVPs. And 19 people showed. And that was a significant difference from the practice I had purchased in 2009, where several hundred people showed to the retirement party. That was kind of the first red flag. Second month, March rolls around, same performance. As the patients were coming in, there just was no work. There was no work. I didn't have anything to diagnose on them. I'd tell them, well, you look great. And then they'd say to me, well, are you sure you're looking close enough? Because the previous dentist would find all kinds of work in my mouth. Go back in and take a look again. Take the Explorer and scrape at these crowns. And I'd go in there and I'd say, you look fine. And they'd mean, no root canal, no crown. And then they'd get up and they'd go and talk to my staff that I don't think this guy knows what he's doing. I don't trust him. They appeared to lose trust in me. They didn't actually say that to me, but that's what it appeared to happen. And it was concerning because they were starting to question my diagnostic ability. By the time August rolled around, I had been 6 months in now, and my relationship with the retiring dentist was growing more and more sour. There really was no improvements, $15,000, $20,000 per month. And I had this $500,000 loan, as well as a loan from the previous practice that I was still paying for. And at this point, a lot of the patients had been in to see me one time. And the difficult thing about all this is that and I shared this morning at the ethics discussion, that the dental work was really well done. I mean, margins sealed, fillings beautifully done, veneers. The guy had amazing hand skills, and he used a high-end lab. So I couldn't really point any fingers at faulty work, which would have been easy. That would have been as plain as the nose on my face. But something told me there's just something's not right. And I remember after seeing more and more patients, I shared this morning, I was driving home, and I was heading home, and all of a sudden everything hit me. I'm like, this is not me, this is him. And I remember I pulled over, and I opened the door up, and I started dry heaving. And I don't do that, I've never had that happen before, because it was hitting me, and I knew what was ahead of me. I knew the years that were coming ahead of me and what was gonna happen. By this point, I had noticed an extremely alarming pattern of practice, where all of the patients were treated like a cookie cutter. Basically, everyone that came in had the exact same mouth. So at the end of August, I decided to do what I call forensic dentistry. And I pulled the billing ledgers, the charts, electronic, written, x-rays, documents, anything I could get my hands on. And I looked at every single procedure this dentist had performed in the final 5 years of his career. I mean, no matter how minor, how major it was, I logged it into this huge Excel spreadsheet. And I spent 9 months doing this every single weekend. So I'm sure you want to know what I found. So I've taken a couple of the charts from that Excel spreadsheet. So if you look at this stuff, some of this is pretty disturbing, but this is a summary of the hard data. This is kind of everything summarized together. If you look, for instance, in, say, 2007, there were 165 patients that he touched, and he performed 307 crowns on those patients. Of those 307 crowns, half of them had root canals performed at the same time. Of the other half that didn't have root canals performed, 88 of them had already had root canals performed. Then there were 152 buildups, and it goes on: prefabricated posts, incision and drainage, pulp caps, pulpal debridements. Because the dental work was so well done, I had to use some other quantitative way of showing something's not right here. When I looked at the crowns that had simultaneously root canals, in other words, when a crown was prepped, so was a root canal, you can see that half the time that was done in the first column to the left. Then when I combined that and looked at the other half, I could see that almost all of them had prior root canals. And when I combined these two charts, the information, the answer I get here is damning. In the last 5 years, 78 to 95% of crowned teeth had had a root canal done to them. Root canals with simultaneous incision and drainage. INDs, are you guys familiar where you incise and drain a swollen abscess on someone? This dentist did 80 of them in 2011 on 86 root canals. Pulp caps leading to root canals. Typically, we do pulp caps to avoid a root canal. If you can see, almost every pulp cap performed, every tooth that had a pulp cap, later on it became a root canal. And then the number of procedures per tooth. If you look here, each tooth had 4 procedures done to it. I don't know about you guys, but in private practice, I'm lucky if every tooth needs 2, maybe a buildup, maybe a crown. The most alarming figures, as I mentioned, was the root canal. So the experts stated, I had several endodontic experts, very well-respected nationwide endodontic experts, that stated that root canals are required in 3 to 7% of teeth previously treated with the crown. This one had 78 to 95%, as I stated, in the final 5 years. And historically, pulp caps fail and go to root canals 35% of the time. On these teeth that were treated with pulp caps, 70 to 100% of them became root canals. The American Dental Association, they basically define a pulp cap as a procedure in which the nearly exposed pulp is covered with protective dressing to protect the pulp from additional injury and to promote healing and repair via formation of secondary dentin. So we're supposed to do pulp caps to try and avoid a root canal, not to lead to a root canal. And one of the smoking guns in my case was that I discovered pulp caps were being done on teeth that had root canals where no pulp existed. INDs were being performed 50 to 100% of the time, as I said. There were actually 80 done in 2011, that's a typo. But no patient recalls. You would figure if 80 INDs were done, don't you think one patient would say, yeah, I remember a time that I came in really swollen, and they had to do incise my gum and place a drain in, and I was on antibiotics? No one remembered that. And an IND is fairly rare occurrence. I've been out for 13 years, and I've done fewer than 5. One of the endodontists on this case had done 1,100 root canals and did fewer than a dozen INDs that year. And then no patient recalled ever having any pain. With this many root canals, you would imagine there'd be some patients with pain. When I was putting things together for this talk, I stumbled upon this chart note, what I circled here. It says, next visit, IND, number 15. If someone comes in with an IND, it's an emergent situation. You don't do it 5 days later. He did it 5 days later here. This is the cookie cutter treatment that I referred to. It was a span of 5 appointments that were all separated by a few days. Appointment 1 was a problem-focused exam where the patient was actually appointed for this. And a problem-focused exam is defined by when the patient comes to us with a problem and we fix it. These patients were appointed for the problem-focused exam. And then he started what he called excavation digging. I don't know what's going on here. We're going to have to see. And then he'd say the decay has gone too deep. It's into the nerve. Well, if the patient got up and walked to another dentist down the street that was ethical, that doctor would look at it and say, well, yeah, of course you need a root canal and a crown. You've got a hole in your tooth. Appointment 2 is a few days later. Crown prep, pulp cap, or pulpal debridement. Those were never done together. It was one or the other. And a crown buildup. Appointment 3, the IND was when that was begun, a couple days later, which if you do a pulp cap, you've got to give the tooth 4 months, 6 months, a year time to see if it's successful or not. Why would you immediately have them in for an IND, a protective restoration, and 2 x-rays? Appointment 4 was where the root canal was begun, the post and core, and 2 more x-rays. And appointment 5 was the crown cementation and an x-ray. This is called unbundling of treatment. Unfortunately, more and more dentists are doing this these days because insurance is put us in such a strict box that this dentist, for instance, was unbundling treatment. By billing those things on different days, it allowed the insurance to cover them or approve them. On average, there were 9 procedures, 6 x-rays, and 5 appointments to restore 1 tooth. The dentist was making around $3,700 to restore a tooth in 2007. Inflation standards, that's $4,500 by today. I was sharing, the Bay Area is an expensive place to live. The cost of living, everything's higher out there. But I'm lucky if I get close to, I guess lucky is not the right word, but on a crown prep, a dentist will typically have maybe 1,800 tops to do a buildup in a crown on a tooth. To be doing 3,700 is outrageous. And then I also discovered that crowns were being replaced every 5 years. So the minute they hit the 5-year mark, they were replaced because that's the interval in which, the minimum interval and time frame in which insurance companies will cover a new crown. The last thing I discovered was unbundling of composite restoration. So, for instance, on a class 3, the way that's supposed to be billed in private practice is a mesiofacial or a mesiofacial lingual, which might be reimbursed at $350. But if they're billed mesial, separate facial, separate lingual, 3 separate fillings, that's $900. And at this point, after having done this for 9 months, I realized that the revenue stream, this practice would only continue if I practice in the same deceitful manner. And then I decided I got to get some attorneys involved here. I hired a prosecuting attorney that has both his doctorate in dentistry and his law degree, who typically fights malpractice and only fights patients' rights. And then I had a medical dental business defense attorney involved as well, because I had signed a contract and I knew this was going to contain both parts. I want to talk a little bit about the code of ethics, the 5 principles here, because I was at a crossroads in my career where I needed to make a decision about how to move forward. The preamble, which is the beginning, says the American Dental Association calls upon dentists to follow high ethical standards, which promote the benefit of the patient as their primary goal. In recognition of this goal, society affords the profession the privilege and obligation of self-government. I wanted to put that in there because there was some discussion of that in the Atlantic article. Qualities of honesty, compassion, kindness, integrity, fairness, and charity are part of the ethical education of a dentist and practice of dentistry and help to define the true professional. As such, each dentist should share in providing advocacy. The ethical dentist strives to do that which is right and good. Section 1 is patient autonomy, self-governance. Under this principle, the dentist's primary obligation includes involving patients in a treatment decision in a meaningful way, with due consideration being given to the patient's needs, desires, and abilities. Clearly, these patients had no idea what was going on in their mouth. They were being scheduled for what he called a fact find, which was the problem-focused exam, and then work just begun from there. Section 2 is Nonmaleficence, which basically means do no harm, and it expresses the concept that professionals have a duty to protect the patient from harm. Excuse me. Section 3 is Beneficence, which means to do good, and the dentist has a duty to promote the patient's welfare. This principle expresses the concept that professions have a duty to act on the benefit of others. Section 4 is a key section for me. It talks about justice and fairness, and it's talking about justifiable criticism. This is finding a difference of opinion with another dentist. And it says that dentists shall be obliged to report to the appropriate viewing agencies instances of gross or continual faulty treatment by other dentists. However, when informing a patient of his or her oral health, the dentist needs to exercise care that the comments made are truthful, informed, and justifiable. And it should, if possible, involve consultation with the previous treating dentist in accordance with applicable law to determine under what circumstances and conditions the treatment was performed. So I was already pretty aware that there should have been no circumstances that this kind of work should be done on patients. However, I still needed to approach the previous dentist. It goes on to say in that same topic that it advises strongly against unjustifiable disparaging statements against another dentist, and where statements are made that are unjustified, it can be an institution of disciplinary action for me. So if I'm going to go and talk to patients or talk to him about anything and it's not justified, then I could have disciplinary proceedings done to me. So at this point I decided I'm going to have to approach the previous dentist. And the journalist kept asking me what was his response, and all I can say is that we disagreed pretty vehemently. I tried several times in person. I tried multiple times via email with the broker, being as the mediator between the two of us. And then I tried with the help of my attorneys and his attorneys in mediation, and we really didn't get anywhere. His attitude was extremely confident, and I was young. I was only out 6 years at the time, and I kept questioning myself that maybe, well, this is the way practices are supposed to be. Maybe I'm too conservative. Maybe I'm doing this wrong. Section 4D, which is the same part of the same area, talks that we can provide expert testimony if it's essential to a just and fair disposition of a judicial or administrative action. So in the summer of 2013, I got multiple colleagues involved. The man pictured here is John Engel, who's the father of modern endodontics. He got pulled into this case as one of the experts because the retiring dentist claimed he learned how to do an IND after taking a course from this gentleman in the late 70s. One of the other experts was an endodontist that was the head of the endodontic department at University of Pacific, and he's now the president-elect for the American Association of Endodontics. I had a prosthodontist, a periodontist, a Delta dental insurance auditor who was a dentist, and a practice sales broker, not the broker that sold me a practice, a completely neutral party. Section 5 is the last section. It talks about veracity, which is truthfulness. Under this principle, the dentist's primary obligations include respecting the position of the trust inherent in the dentist-patient relationship, communicating truthfully and without deception. By this point, I now, with all of the expert, had enough knowledge that I felt my character and integrity is being called into question if I'm aware of something on these patients and I don't disclose it to them. I realized that this dentist had violated every single principle in the ADA Code of Ethics. But I was at a place of uncharted territory. How do I disclose this to the patients and without disparaging comments about the previous dentist? How am I going to make that ethical decision? These patients, I'm going to see them for the rest of my career. How am I going to keep this a secret? What am I going to do? I kept asking myself. So I put this picture in here. I know it seems kind of like a strange photo, but several weeks went by, sleepless nights, and I didn't know how to handle this. And one day I was sitting in my office, And I noticed framed on the wall in the corner of my room was my professional oath. It's one of those things you get when you get your white coat in dental school and you take something similar to the Hippocratic Oath, and it discusses everything we're going to do to protect our profession and our patients and care for the community. But I never really read it outside of when I took the oath in 2004. And I walked up to it and I started reading it. And it basically says at the top, University-Pacific School of Dentistry Professional Oath. In light of all I hold sacred in the presence of my family, friends, and teachers, I, Brendon Zeidler, pledge to fulfill my obligation as a member of the dental profession. And it goes down, just like the Hippocratic Oath, everything that we're planning to do. But I got to the 7th paragraph, and it said, I'm responsible for upholding my profession's integrity. I will strive to counsel those deficient in character or competence, and I will expose those who engage in fraud or deception. I will not use my medical knowledge in any way contrary to the laws of humanity. So at this point, my pursuit became three-pronged. Yes, it started because I wanted my money back, of course. I had spent $500,000 on a practice that was almost worthless. But it became a three-pronged approach with two other items. I wanted exposure of what had occurred, and I wanted restitution from my patients that were betrayed. And then I wanted to protect our practice. So on October 23rd, 2013, I filed a lawsuit. And if you see here, the complaint for damages are breach of contract, intentional misrepresentation, concealment, and rescission. There's nothing on there about malpractice because I can't sue a dentist for something he did to someone else. This had to be a business lawsuit. And so began meeting with the patients. I started one by one, and I brought them into my office to a location where they were sitting across from me rather than in the operatory lying down looking at me, put us on an even field so that I was lateral to them rather than above them. And I started to disclose everything that had been done. And most at this point had figured something was askew. I mean, they didn't have, one of them had 5 or 6 root canals in the previous year, and then nothing from me. So I asked them questions and I allowed them to kind of begin formulating their own conclusions. I'd met with about 70 of them, give or take. These patients saw the previous dentist for 25 to 36 years and knew me for 6 months. And the strange thing is that 100% of them believed me. Every single one of them. I think they had some inner voice that was telling them that their dental treatment was in question. But maybe they were too afraid to ask or look into it. I don't know if it's what I said or how I said it or the everything that I showed, but they believed me. A lot of them began asking me, well, what can I do? Like, what should I do? And it's not really my job to direct them on how to handle this legally. So I suggested the dental board, have the dental board look at it. It's an unbiased third-party opinion, and that'll give them an opinion that's different from my own. Obviously, I have a bone to pick with him, but I wanted the dental board to tell these patients whether or not their treatment was necessary. All the dental board cares about, I'm imagining it's this way in any state, but in California, they only care about the patient, and they will stop at nothing. They will be relentless. Whatever it is, they'll come after the dentist that's done something wrong. So I hope you guys don't ever see what a dental board complaint looks like, but this is how they come. And it says, the Dental Board of California received a complaint from the above referenced patient concerning dental treatment that was rendered. If it's for you, it stops there. But this one says, rendered by another dentist. However, you are the keeper of records. Then the fine print, I shared this morning, is that I have 15 days to cough up their records, copying x-rays, charts, everything they need. Otherwise, they're going to start fining me $250 a day up to a maximum of $5,000. Well, these things were coming in the droves. There were so many of them, I couldn't keep up with it. There were more than 40 of them. And so they'd come in, they'd give me the complaint, they'd request the records. I had to take them down to C Dental and pay for the records to be produced. And they're all old-fashioned x-rays. Obviously, it was an older practice. There wasn't digital x-rays. In returning the records, I wrote a cover letter for each and every one of them, giving my opinion of every single thing done to the patient. I recall that the first one was filed in November of 2013, and I remember exactly who that man was. He's still my patient. 10 patients went out on their own and found their own attorneys and began civil suits. Next, I'm going to show some of the radiographs here I just gathered a random group of radiographs, but I thought it might be important for you guys to see what I had experienced and what was coming into my office. Some of it's kind of disturbing. This man had every posterior tooth crowned and every single one root canaled with a post. This was his wife. Same thing. Two totally different mouths. This is another man. Are those coming up clear enough? Every single one of those is root canaled. This was his wife. This is another random patient. These mouths look exactly the same. It's a cookie cutter. And another one. These are all different patients, believe it or not. This is a patient of mine. This is a recent pano. This man had 16 root canals done, and now he needs 2 implants. And as you know, root canals are brittle. They begin to break, leading to implants. Well, this guy's in his 40s. He's going to require a lot of dental work as he gets older. I thought this was kind of neat to add, but these are Straumann BLX implants, and they osseointegrate in 6 weeks. This man had 17 root canals done, and he's already on his way to 4 implants. This one's pretty disturbing. This poor lady came in, full upper denture, and 11 lower teeth. This is in 2003. This was an old-fashioned printed film X-ray, so it's not as clear. This is an up-close shot of those 11 teeth. This is 7 years later. Every single one except one was root canaled. She actually received 12 crowns, one of them twice, and 10 root canals. I put this picture up here because if you look at it, the margins are sealed nicely. This is what every single tooth looked like. But what stands out to me and stood out to some of the experts is that the root canals, look how small the root canals are, how thin and slight they are. And one of the experts came up with this theory that if root canals are done unnecessarily, all you need to do is remove the nerve and slam one gutta percha in there, file up to a 20 or 25 file. But a root canal that's necessary has unhealthy tissue inside the tooth, and you need to hollow the tooth out and cut it back to clean tissue. So would likely need larger files placed in them and larger gutta percha. If you look, the posts really don't serve much purpose at all, just another way of another revenue stream. One of the experts did say that because there's a lot of tooth structure left and the root canals were not necessary, the tooth is less likely to fracture over time. So that's maybe a little bit of silver lining for these patients. So just some numbers here. One husband and wife spent $250,000 in 10 years. One husband and wife had 42 root canals between the two of them. Another pair had 42 between the two of them. One patient had 18 root canals in 5 years. And one late 20-year-old had 15 root canals. And many patients spent $50,000 to $100,000 in the final 7 years. Next, I want to actually show a patient interview. This is being put together by the American College of Dentists. It was an interview that was done of both me and this particular patient. I never met this patient. He was a patient in the practice and left before I took over. And he was kind enough to let me use his interview. But I've taken kind of pieces of it. So the first part, he talks about his experience with the selling dentist or the retiring dentist. Then he talks a little bit about some experience with a patient, with his doctor now. And then he talks a little bit at the end, you'll see me off to the side here, about the Atlantic article and what it meant for him. And you'll be able to see the entire video. It's 25, 30 minutes long. It'll be on the ACD website shortly. But I wanted to thank them for letting me show this.
or so sometime, in my junior year or something, we got connected with this dentist, and so did my sister, as well as my mother. So there were three of us that were being treated by the doctor, and through the years, spent most of our time, hearing from the doctor, you need to have a root canal, you need to have a root canal, you need to have a root canal, but you need to have a crown. And it got to the point where it was expected. Every single visit, it was expected. In fact, it got to the point where we would call each other after a visit. And I'm serious about that. We would call, and the net effect of that over the years. So I said I started, as a junior in high school and I was with that doctor until he retired. So I don't know how many years he was in practice, but you can imagine, how long that was for, not myself, but my mother and my sister too. And what that meant in terms of, work done in our mouths. In fact, to the point where on the family impact was, I've got, a sister who continues to talk about it and weeps every single time because she feels like, and not, I don't mean to, be somewhat dramatic, but she feels like she's been maimed, that there's been work done on her that was not necessary to be done. My mom, same thing. Each one of us probably has somewhere between 7 and 9 crowns. And the majority of those have root canals, done in them. So it's a pretty traumatic, event. And we had no way of knowing whether or not what was happening to us was legitimate or not. And the reason why is some people have asked, did you try to seek out other opinions from people? And the answer is yes. But as I've said before, each time that we went to other dentists, they would just praise, his work. Now, they didn't know whether it was necessary because they're looking at what's happened, afterwards. So we had no way. But what we knew and what we felt was that the number of times that this was happening was above what we considered to be normal. There's just no way with the way that we keep our teeth. We're flossers. We brush 2-3 times a day. That's not accounting for genetics and stuff. We get that, but there's just no way we could come up with, hey, that this kind of work would be done to the three of us. What the long-term effect has been is an erosion of trust in dentistry. So, in fact, as late as this morning, I got a text from my sister saying that her son is getting prepped for braces and they want to remove 4 teeth. And I don't trust them. So what am I to do? And this treatment had to do with a tooth that I had to have a root canal on. And they performed that root canal because it was, I had an infection, a legitimate infection in that tooth. I also had a rotator cuff surgery, so they're worried about the infection spreading to rotator cuff. So they went in and they fixed that. And I was reluctant with that too, but it was really painful, so I knew that there was a problem. So when they fixed that, and then I was approached by my dentist, and he said, well, I think you need to do a crown. Well, in my head, the first thing that came up was, here's another dentist telling me I need to have another crown. Is that the only solution we have here? Because I'm at a point now, I've endured so much pain in my mouth and discomfort from just all the prior stuff we've done that I'm looking for ways for people to come up with options to stay out of my mouth. So there was an option. The option was, well, we could try to fill it. It would be a large fill, but we could try to fill it. But my dentist highly recommended going the crown. And I ultimately decided to go with the crown because I trust this dentist. Well, he retired was the main reason, or I probably would have stayed a little bit longer. But how much longer? I don't know, because we were just at a point where I was either going to run out of teeth or I was going to run out of money. one of the two, because it just couldn't keep up with the pace. And it also manifested itself in I would deliberately not go to cleaning checkups, okay, because I knew what the outcome was going to be. I would walk in with no pain and what I perceived to be no problems in my mouth, no bleeding, no anything, and walk out of there having to reschedule to come in to start working on a crown and a root canal. I was absolutely relieved over the fact that we were having this conversation, and that hopefully, what we suspected was the issue was going to come out. And so my reaction to it was one of relief, and by what also a sort of a renewed hope that there was people out there who did have an ethic. I couldn't, quite frankly, believe that there was somebody who was questioning somebody else in the same profession. I really was I called my sister and said, "You can't believe the conversation I just had." And then she said, "Well, we'll see what happens." And so we've been kind of looking in news articles and papers and that kind of thing to see what's going on, and it's been very tight-lipped. And then it was my sister actually forwarded the Atlantic article over to me, and I dove right into it and started reading it. I was like, hallelujah. And then I presented that article to my dentist, who has some connections with you.
So in closing here, I know I don't have much more time. I'll go through this fairly quickly. I received a lot of emails of support from patients around the country, the American College of Dentists, and now several dental schools, about 200. But I did receive a lot of emails from patients that I don't know who were poking fun of these patients that had all of this unnecessary dental work. And what I want to share here is that it has nothing to do with intelligence. These teachers, physicians, mechanics, businessmen, and women. He did the same thing to everybody. It's not about intelligence, it's about betrayal of trust. Then the ADA versus ACD. I'll go through this real quick. The ADA actually was extremely defensive. I'm not sure if you guys read this, but they focused more on the fact that dentists are not this way. And they had a strong disagreement that dentists are motivated by profit to pay down their student loans, and I truly believe that that is the case. But there are outliers out there that are not that way. They talked about the Gallup public opinion, that dentists are still ranked as above the most ethical practitioners. But then there was a stab here at the journalist. Every profession, unfortunately, has some individuals with questionable ethics. This is true for journalism as it is for dentistry. The ACD, on the other hand, and I know Dr. Quinones talked about it this morning a little bit, wanted to focus more on the good aspects. And they said, we regard the Atlantic article as an opportunity for reflection on ways to build an even stronger dental profession, grounded in strong science, service, and the mutually shared standards among dentists. We honor those who make patients' oral health paramount. It's understood that there are multiple legitimate perspectives on the material presented in the article. There's an opportunity here to learn by listening to these multiple points of view. So in conclusion, my case settled after 3 years, $275,000 spent in attorney's fees. It finished February 28th, 2015. I purchased a third practice in July of 2015, so I got right back up on the horse, which has been a successful transition. I purchased a building with my brother, and we merged together, my brother, my father, and myself. The 10 patients that filed civil suits received $3 million. One husband and wife that I think I showed you received $700,000. The Santa Clara County District Attorney Office, on behalf of the Dental Board of California, arrested this dentist on 28 counts of felony insurance fraud. The Dental Board has been revoking the license administrative action since October 4th of 2017. And then the assistant and hygienist were given the option by the Dental Board to be a witness or a suspect. He posted $250,000 bail, so he's out of jail. In the criminal prosecution, the trial starts Monday. The last thing I want to say is moral compass. I would suggest to the young students here to find someone they look up to, whether it's a friend, a colleague, a teacher, and use them as your moral compass. Dental insurance companies are clamping down on private practice dentists, and it's making some dentists come up with creative diagnosis, finding things to bill for as to ways to circumvent around these insurance companies. And the transgressions that happen start slowly, like erosion, like a wave hitting a rock. You don't notice it because it happens at a very slow pace, but over time these transgressions get worse and worse, and before you know it, you could be in a full-blown fraud. I use my father, who's been practicing 51 years, as my moral compass. He's always taught me that when a patient sits in your chair, to picture them as someone you love more than anything. So for me, it's my son. I have a 4-year-old son, but prior to this, it was other family members. When that patient sits in my chair, I basically say, what would I do on my son? What would I want on him? And you never go wrong. I believe in always do what is right, even when it seems it's easier to do what is wrong. And one of my attorneys used to always say, stand up for injustice, for if you permit it, you promote it. And I just want to close with the end of the oath. It says, with this oath, I willingly assume these responsibilities. If I honor this oath, may I be granted fulfillment and joy in my practice of the art of dentistry, respected while I live and remembered with affection thereafter. And it's signed by the dean. And this is just a quote I like, to thine own self be true, from William Shakespeare. So I know I kind of went over my time there. We have a couple minutes.